Brothers and sisters, we are gathered not to entertain egos, but to confront the truth, raw, uncompromising, and undeniable. Too many so-called leaders step to the podium with soft tongues, smooth talk, and sugar-coated lies, thinking the people are too blind to see past the Polish. But I say this today, you cannot decorate falsehood and expect it to shine like truth. There was a man, dressed in robes, adorned with titles, full of pride, who thought he could silence a message with reputation alone. He thought standing behind a pulpit made his word holy. But let me remind you, a title doesn't make a man righteous. His actions do. When he rose, he came with doctrine. He came with tradition. He came with man-made comforts dressed up as divine commands. But what he lacked was vision. What he lacked was courage. What he lacked was truth. He came to debate. I came to awaken. He came to defend an institution. I came to defend the people. He came to preach peace without justice. I came to preach justice first, or there will be no peace. You can't win against a man who speaks what your heart already knows. You can't outshine a light that's been burning in darkness for 400 years. And you sure can't beat the people when they rise behind that truth. So when the man opened his mouth, the people listened politely. But when the people heard fire, truth spoken without fear, without filter, they stood up. Not for the man, not for the messenger, but for the message. Because the truth doesn't bow to rank. It doesn't kneel before seniority. And it sure doesn't tremble at the presence of someone wearing a collar. That day, what was defeated was not the man himself, but the lie he carried. That day, the silence that followed his sermon was louder than the applause that followed the truth. See, you don't lose when you get proven wrong. You lose when you cling to lies after being shown the truth. And too many ministers, too many politicians, too many leaders are doing just that, clinging to their status while the people suffer. This is not a personal battle. This is a war between truth and illusion, between those who wish to free the people's minds and those who benefit from keeping them shackled. In every generation there comes a moment when the people must choose between polished deception and raw, unfiltered truth. Titles have long been used as shields, robes, medals, positions of power, religious garments, all meant to signal authority, to suggest wisdom, to demand obedience. But none of these things can substitute for truth. The people, even when misled for a time, carry an innate ability to recognize when they are being lied to, and when someone is finally telling it like it is. That recognition doesn't always come immediately, and it may be buried under years of propaganda or cultural conditioning. But when truth is spoken with conviction, it rings through the air like a bell, and no title, no position, no official endorsement can compete with that sound. Those who cling to titles often believe they are untouchable. They stand on stages and pulpits, expecting the people to kneel before them, to accept their words not because they are right, but because they came from someone in power. But the people are not blind. They may be patient. They may be respectful, but they are not foolish. Once that bell of truth rings, there is no unhearing it. No matter how finely someone speaks, no matter how ceremoniously they enter the room, if what they say contradicts the people's lived reality, if it hides the pain they feel daily, if it glosses over injustice, they will reject it. They might not say it to the speaker's face. They might not shout it in the moment, but the shift will begin inside their hearts, and that shift cannot be reversed. That is why truth outranks titles, because titles are given. Truth is earned. Titles are granted by systems designed to maintain themselves. Truth is revealed through struggle, through suffering, through seeing the world for what it really is. A man with a title can walk into a room and command silence, but a man with the truth can walk into a room and command transformation. The difference is immense. One seeks to preserve the hierarchy. The other seeks to break it down and build something new. One depends on being recognized. The other depends on being felt. Throughout history, those who challenged power with truth were labeled dangerous. They were hunted, discredited, even killed. Not because they were violent, but because their words threatened the illusion upon which authority stood. And yet, those very words live on, not the decrees of kings, not the sermons of men seeking applause, but the raw, blistering truths of men and women who saw injustice and refused to stay quiet. That is the proof of what lasts. That is the evidence of what truly holds weight. When someone with a title stands before the people and tries to mask oppression in poetic phrases, the crowd may nod politely. But when someone without a title speaks with fire, calling out injustice, speaking from the soul, pointing straight at the systems that suffocate the people, the crowd ignites. They don't just listen, they lean in. They don't just clap, they commit. Because they recognize themselves in the struggle. They hear their own stories in the voice of the truth teller. They don't need credentials to know what's real. They need courage, and the truth gives them that. The moment someone challenges the people's dignity while hiding behind a title, they set themselves up for exposure. The title may have protected them once, but it cannot save them when truth enters the room. That's because truth does not bow. It does not blink. It does not pause to ask for permission. It steps forward uninvited and changes everything. When it does, those who rely on titles alone are left scrambling. They try to reassert their authority. They try to call for order, but the people are already awakened. And once awakened, they cannot go back to sleep. There are leaders in name and there are leaders in truth. The former chase admiration. The latter accept isolation. The former use their position to silence opposition. The latter use their pain to empower the powerless. The people know the difference, even if they don't always say it out loud. They know when they are being pandered to. They know when they are being manipulated. And they know when someone finally stands before them with no mask, no performance, just the unapologetic truth. And it's not about eloquence. The truth doesn't always come dressed in perfect grammar or flawless rhetoric. Sometimes it stumbles, sometimes it screams, sometimes it whispers. But when it speaks, it touches a place in the soul that no institution can reach. That is the power that threatens those who rely on titles. That is why they fear the truth. Not because it is wrong, but because it is undeniable. And once heard, it cannot be unheard. Truth outranks titles because truth walks with the people. It suffers with them. It dreams with them. It mourns with them. Titles hover above the people, often disconnected, often uninterested in anything that doesn't reinforce their authority. That disconnect is their downfall. Because while they speak from on high, truth speaks from within. And the voice from within is louder than the loudest sermon from the mountaintop. It doesn't demand loyalty. It inspires it. It doesn't threaten consequences. It delivers liberation. That is why, when truth and title meet face to face in the public square, the outcome is inevitable. One stands stiff, rehearsed, repeating lines that serve the old world. The other speaks with fire, forged in the furnace of injustice. One hides behind language meant to confuse. The other cuts through the confusion like lightning. The people feel the difference. And feeling it, they make their choice, not with their hands, not with their words, but with their hearts. And that choice will always favor the voice that told them the truth over the title that tried to control them. When a man stands up to challenge truth, he must come with more than titles, robes, or a history of applause, because the moment he opens his mouth against what is real, he steps onto ground that cannot be bought, manipulated, or reasoned with through prestige. Truth is not a matter of position. It is a matter of alignment with reality. And when a man tries to argue against reality while standing on illusions, the weight of his pride begins to collapse beneath him. The louder he speaks, the more the people hear what is missing. The more he gestures, the more obvious it becomes that he is fighting not with substance, but with status. And status is no defense against a message rooted in suffering, sacrifice, and clarity. The tragedy is that many who oppose truth are not inherently evil. They are simply addicted to comfort. They have grown used to the perks of position, to the nods of respect, to the unchecked authority granted by uniforms and institutions. When confronted by truth, they feel exposed. Not because truth insults them, but because truth reveals them. It pulls back the curtain and shows what lies beneath all the pomp and ceremony. And what lies beneath is often fear. Fear of being irrelevant, fear of being outgrown, fear of losing control over a people who are beginning to think for themselves. That fear masquerades as confidence. It presents itself in long speeches, in aggressive debates, in defensive arrogance. But the people see through it. They know when a man is fighting to protect the truth versus when he is fighting to protect himself. When a man steps forward to debate truth, hoping to defeat it with tradition or volume, he walks into a battle he cannot win. Because truth doesn't need to be defended with anger. It stands still while the challenger flails. It does not have to shout, because it is felt more than heard. It resonates, and resonance cannot be debated. It can only be experienced. So the challenger grows louder, more dramatic, hoping his noise will cover up the hollowness of his argument. But that very noise becomes his downfall. Because the people are listening now, not to what he says, but to what he doesn't say. They listen for the gaps. They listen for the contradictions. They listen for the fear disguised as authority. And once they hear it, they cannot unhear it. A man who challenges truth without substance is like a shadow trying to block the sun. For a moment, it may seem effective, but as soon as the angle changes, as soon as the people move even slightly, the shadow disappears and the light returns. That light, truth, doesn't need to fight. It simply waits because it knows time is on its side. Truth doesn't expire. It doesn't decay. But lies do. They age poorly. They collapse under pressure. They need maintenance. They require constant repetition to stay alive. And the moment someone stops repeating them, they fall apart. That's why so many of these challenges repeat themselves endlessly. Not because they're persuasive, but because deep down, they're scared the lie won't survive in silence. What's even more telling is how these men react when they lose, when the people don't clap, when the room is quiet, when their usual applause turns into hesitation. They blame the audience. They say the people are ungrateful, uneducated, missile. But the truth is, the people simply woke up. They realize that style without substance is no longer enough. They realize that credentials don't equal clarity, and they realize that when a man speaks from experience, from conviction, from a place of sacrifice, his words carry weight that no title can replicate. It is easy to dismiss a truth teller when he stands alone, but when the people begin to echo him, when his voice becomes their voice, then the power shifts. The man who once stood on the stage is now surrounded by eyes that see clearly. He feels naked, because for the first time his title no longer shields him. His affiliation no longer protects him. His status no longer impresses, and in that moment the battle is lost, not because he was defeated in debate, but because the people stop believing the illusion. Once the illusion is broken, it cannot be repaired. No amount of fiery rebuttals or theological gymnastics can restore what has already been exposed. Those who challenge truth often believe they are doing something noble. They believe they are guarding the gates, protecting the people from radical ideas, from discomfort, from change. But they fail to understand that the people are no longer asking for comfort. They are demanding transformation. They are tired of band-aids on bullet wounds. They are tired of explanations that justify injustice. They are tired of being told to wait, to trust, to obey, while they watch the world fall apart around them. So when someone speaks truth to that pain, he becomes a mirror. And those who oppose him are forced to look at themselves. Not the version they present to the public, but the version they've buried under years of performance. A man who steps into that arena unprepared, thinking he can beat truth with better vocabulary or louder delivery, finds himself dismantled not by the other speaker, but by the audience. Because it is not the debate that matters, it is the awakening it causes. When the people begin to whisper, then murmur, then speak, then shout, the challenger realizes he was never debating one man. He was debating the collective memory of an oppressed people. He was debating the fire that burns quietly in their chests. And he was never going to win that. Truth is not elegant. It is not always kind. But it is always present. And when a man underestimates it, thinking he can twist it to fit his narrative or outtalk it with polished phrases, he doesn't just lose the argument, he loses his grip on the people's trust. That trust, once broken, does not return. Not to him, not to the system he represents. And that is the true loss. Not just public embarrassment, but public rejection. Not just the failure of his words, but the collapse of his entire posture of authority. All because he challenged truth without the weight to stand against it. Silence, in the aftermath of a performance meant to inspire obedience or admiration, speaks volumes that even thunderous applause cannot match. When a man stands before a crowd and offers words dressed in importance, decorated with titles, heavy with religious or political symbolism, and yet receives no echo in return, no clapping, no movement, no visible agreement, it is not just silence, it is rejection. It is the sound of the people withholding their approval, their energy, their spirit. That kind of silence is loud because it exposes the disconnect between the speaker's intention and the people's reception. And that disconnect is more dangerous to false authority than any shouted protest could ever be. Applause following truth is not just appreciation, it's affirmation. It's the collective release of bottled frustration, the human reaction to hearing something that resonates not with what they were taught to believe, but with what they know in their bones to be real. That kind of applause doesn't wait for permission. It bursts forth like a storm. It confirms that the speaker didn't just reach their ears, he reached their conscience. And that's why it's dangerous to those who profit off silence. Because when truth is applauded, it gains momentum. It spreads. It moves from person to person like wildfire. And there's no extinguisher for that kind of flame. The silence that follows falsehood is not the silence of contemplation. It is the silence of disbelief, the silence of disconnection. When a man finishes speaking and looks out expecting affirmation, but instead meets stillness, his authority begins to shake. The robe he wears, the reputation he holds, the pulpit he stands behind, all begin to feel hollow. That's because the power he believed he held over the people was never real. It was borrowed. And the silence proves that the loan has been revoked. Silence after falsehood strips away illusion. It reveals the truth that the people may still be seated, but their minds have already left the room. Their hearts have already moved on. They've begun comparing what they've heard to what they've lived, and the comparison doesn't hold. The sermon or speech or lecture they've just witnessed falls flat, not because it lacked polish, but because it lacked courage, it lacked authenticity. And authenticity, once experienced, makes its absence unbearable. The difference between applause after truth and silence after falsehood is the difference between awakening and denial. Applause is the people's way of saying, yes, that is what we felt but couldn't articulate. Silence is the people's way of saying, no, that isn't our reality, and we're no longer pretending it is. That shift in response is subtle, but its implications are massive, because it shows that the people are no longer waiting to be told what to believe. They are actively choosing what to believe based on what aligns with their lived experience. When a man who once commanded rooms is now met with silence, it's because the people have measured his words and found them wanting. They have seen another voice, another message, another path, and they prefer it. That moment, though it may seem quiet, is revolutionary, because it is the moment the people stop following noise and start following clarity. They stop being impressed by volume and start being moved by truth, and that shift cannot be undone. Public silence after a hollow message is not a passive act. It is an indictment. It is the collective response of people who feel insulted by the attempt to manipulate them. It is the most dignified form of rebellion, because it robs the speaker not just of applause, but of validation. And without validation, authority begins to fade, not because someone attacked it, but because it lost its grip on the people's belief. And belief is the true currency of power. Once it is gone, the restive speaker, standing in that silence, will try to recover. He'll shift in place. He'll offer one more quote, one more story, one more plea. But it won't work, because the people already made their decision. Their silence has spoken. It has pierced through the robe, the pulpit, the tradition, and reached the speaker's ego directly. And that is a moment many in power cannot handle, because they were never trained to deal with rejection. They were trained to expect obedience. In contrast, when truth is spoken, even if it challenges, even if it discomforts, even if it demands change, it earns the people's response. That response may be immediate, or it may simmer, but it always comes, because the truth does something no falsehood can. It gives people their reflection. It lets them see themselves, not in the words of the speaker, but in the impact of the message. And when that reflection is clear, they respond not because they were told to, but because they feel seen. The failure of a lie is not always in the argument. It is in the silence it generates. A silence that signals the people are no longer with you. A silence that says, we hear you, but we do not believe you. And belief cannot be forced. It must be earned. And the ones who earn it are those who speak not for applause, but from a place of conviction, pain, and love for the people. Silence after falsehood is not a neutral act. It is a verdict. And applause after truth is not flattery. It is revolution. One reveals that the speaker has lost the room. The other reveals that the people have found themselves. And in that contrast, a new power is born, not from the podium, but from the crowd. From those who once nodded in obedience, now nod in recognition. From those who once clapped on cue, now clap with conviction. That is how the tide turns. Not with shouts, but with silences. Not with noise, but with knowing. And those who misunderstand this shift will keep talking, not realizing their words are no longer landing where it matters. There is a war taking place in every society, every institution, every conversation that pretends to be neutral. It is not a war of guns and knives, but a war of ideas, of voices, of truths, and illusions colliding in the minds of the people. It is the war between what is real and what is rehearsed, between what liberates and what manipulates, between those who risk everything to speak a truth the system fears, and those who are rewarded for maintaining the illusion that keeps that system intact. When two men stand in opposition before a crowd, it may look like a personal conflict, a clash of egos or rhetoric, but beneath the surface, it is always deeper. It is not about them, it is about what they represent. One carries the weight of truth, earned through pain, clarity, and confrontation. The other carries the weight of illusion, preserved through repetition, fear, and compromise. Those who fight for truth rarely wear the garments of power. They don't need ceremony to legitimize their voice. Their authority comes from connection. They speak from within the experience of the people, not above it. That is why their message cuts deeper than well-written sermons or polished speeches. It doesn't aim to impress, it aims to ignite. The one who speaks from illusion, however, stands on shaky ground. He must maintain a certain posture, a certain voice, a certain air of control. Because if even one thread of his illusion unravels, the entire garment begins to fall apart. Illusions require constant upkeep. They are fragile. And truth, once it enters the room, puts that fragility on full display. The real battle is not between individuals, it is between systems of thought. On one side, there is a system that tells the people to be patient, to obey, to wait for change through approved channels, to respect hierarchy even when it oppresses them. On the other side is a voice that refuses to wait, refuses to flatter, refuses to lie. That voice says what others are too afraid to say. It calls out the rot in the foundation, not just the cracks in the walls. It names the enemy, not in abstract terms, but in clear, direct language that leaves no room for confusion. That clarity is dangerous to the illusion, because illusions survive on ambiguity. They thrive in confusion. When someone dares to name things as they are, the illusion begins to fade. This is why institutions often invest more energy in silencing the truth teller than in addressing the truth itself. They fear what happens when people begin to think critically. When they begin to question not only what they hear, but why they believed it for so long. The illusion wants obedience. Truth demands awakening. And awakening is irreversible. Once the people see clearly, They don't go back. They can pretend for a while, but the old narrative loses its grip. They start to notice the contradictions. They start to hear the emptiness in certain words. They start to feel uneasy when someone speaks too perfectly but says nothing real. When the truth teller speaks, he does not speak to destroy the person standing against him. He speaks to destroy the lie that person carries. He speaks to break the spell that has been cast over the people for generations. And he knows the cost. He knows that systems do not yield easily. He knows he will be called divisive, ungrateful, dangerous. But he also knows that silence is complicity. That to say nothing is to serve the illusion. And so he speaks, not because he wants to win an argument, but because he wants to break the chains wrapped around the minds of his people. The illusion will fight back. It will use fear, respectability, shame. It will remind the people of the speaker's flaws. It will accuse him of arrogance, of disloyalty, of stirring unnecessary conflict. But none of that matters when the people have begun to see through the smoke. Because in the war between truth and illusion, once the fog lifts, the choice becomes clear. Not always easy, but clear. Do they continue to follow comfort, or do they follow conviction? Do they continue to bow to authority, or do they stand behind authenticity? The war is not won with a single speech or a single moment of applause. It is a long, grueling battle fought in the minds of every person who has ever felt conflicted between what they've been told and what they've felt. And that is where the real victory lies, not in defeating the speaker who stands against truth, but in liberating the people from the need to believe him. Because when the people no longer need the illusion, it collapses on its own. It doesn't need to be destroyed. It simply becomes irrelevant. And irrelevance is death for a system built on performance. Every time a person challenges the truth and loses publicly, the illusion suffers a blow, not because the people hate the challenger, but because they no longer fear him. And that shift in fear is everything. Because the illusion relies on fear to survive, fear of being wrong, fear of speaking out, fear of being alone. Truth breaks that fear. It creates solidarity. It shows people they are not alone. And once they know that, they are no longer manageable. They are no longer docile. They begin to think, to speak, to act. And that action, born from awareness, becomes the foundation of a movement. This war is constant. It plays out in schools, in pulpits, in politics, in families. Anywhere people are told to sit down, shut up, and be satisfied, the war is raging. And anywhere someone rises to say enough, they step into the arena knowingly or not. They may not have the title. They may not have the platform. But if they have the truth, they have more power than those who rule by illusion. Because illusions fade. But truth remains, waiting for someone brave enough to speak it and strong enough to survive what comes after.